Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, so we encourage you to invite your friends and family to it. This is the third episode in a special series featuring the Mexican Liberation Organization, Unión do Barrio. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Unión do Barrio Secretary General Benjamin Prado discuss socialism versus capitalism, an important topic for today's heating political climate. This episode also has a goal to raise $2,000 towards Black Power 96 Radio's July member fund drive. Now through July 18th, the radio station is working to raise $6,000 to maintain the Black community's own radio station. All Omali Taught Me listeners are encouraged to support the radio station, which airs the Chairman Studies live every Sunday on 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg and streaming on the Black Power 96 mobile app and at blackpower96.org. We will start with an overview from our chairman, followed by a presentation from Benjamin. After thorough discussion among both panelists, we will open it up to our live viewers to ask questions. It is my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, our chairman, Omali Yeshitela, Uhuru chairman.
Uhuru, comrades, I want to thank you so much. And I really want to extend a very warm welcome to our comrade Benjamin from Unión do Barrio, which is just a long-standing, outstanding ally of the party, a sister organization of the African People's Socialist Party. I'm extremely happy that compañero Benjamin Prado is able to be with us and has been with us for the last 2 weeks. I think it gives us a new element of concreteness to the theory that we've been talking about for so many months, and actually a few years on Omali Taught Me. So I just want to again extend serious welcome and Uhuru welcome to compañero Benjamin. Also, I want to remind everybody again that this is a part of our annual effort to assist Black Power 96 FM radio here in St. Petersburg, Florida, in its fundraising drive. Black Power 96.3 has been extraordinarily generous to allow us this time for Omali Taught Me. And it has obviously demonstrated that it keeps to its commission as an institution of the African People's Education Defense Fund to deal with these glaring disparities that exist between our community, health, politics, political, economic disparities that exist between our community, that is the African colonized community, and the colonizer community of white people. So this is really important. And this show on today, we have a responsibility to raise $2,000. And we're calling on everybody who is participating, viewing this, to make contributions. And you can do that by going to blackpower96.org/donate and offer a generous contribution. And I think that is really timely to do that on today, especially given the topic that we are dealing with as a study, the whole issue of socialism versus capitalism. And socialism makes certain kinds of assumptions about the participation of the people. It recognizes the critical role that the laboring masses have in producing all value, all wealth. And as opposed to capitalism, that wealth is in the control of the people, of the workers, as opposed to the rulers. And I know that many African people do not have experience dealing with what is characterized as community-funded radio stations. Usually to even get a station, to have access to our own capacity to talk to each other via radio is not common. It's not common for us in our community, and usually we don't end up, we're not aware, we're not conscious of the fact that we are, all of us, pay to support the radio stations and other mediums of the ruling class. Every time we go shopping, every time we spend money, because it's those commercials on the commercial radio stations that keep those stations afloat. It is the different sectors of the bourgeoisie that make that happen. And we are the ones who feed the bourgeoisie. We are the ones who shop at the Targets or all these other institutions that fund the radio stations that we're most familiar with. So we're asking people to recognize that the same people who end up involuntarily supporting the capitalist organizations, media organizations. I think there's something like 6 media outlets that control something like 90% or more of the media in this country and perhaps in the world. So we involuntarily end up supporting those institutions, and we are asking the people to unite with us and voluntarily support this institution. Support Black Power 96 FM. And again, you can make your contributions, and I know we like to say nothing is too small, and that is true. Usually we don't have that much, but nothing is too large either. So if you got a lot, just go to blackpower96.org/donate, make a contribution, and give an indication of why, if you feel like it, why you want to support the station and why you want to support Omali Taught Me. So again, I want to express my profound appreciation first to Comrade Akile for the job that she does in making this station accessible to us, and just the practical work, how her team pulls together the engineering and makes it possible for you to see and participate with me. And I want to again thank Compañero Benjamin Prado, who is the Undersecretary General of the Unión de Barrio. So today we want to talk about this whole issue of socialism versus capitalism. And it's really important that this discussion be held. It's one of the many really important discussions that we have to have. One reason it's important to have this discussion is, as all of you who are in the party, in our movement, in Unión de Barrio, who are working to try and, or who are involved in the whole struggle to change the world, are aware that there has been an explosion of activity, struggle, protest that's occurred within the United States that's influenced struggle, protest, or if not influenced, it's certainly given certain definition to protest around the world. It has altered for many the perception of the United States, the carefully crafted perception of the United States being this bastion of democracy and freedom and free speech and freedom of assembly and what have you. All of those things that you find in the Constitution and the various other kinds of documents that supposedly represent what the United States is. So these protests have actually brought into serious disrepute for the first time since the 1960s. I mean, I know a lot of people were able to see what happened in Ferguson in August of 2014, but Ferguson, for all of its significance, and it was extraordinary significance as a breakout moment, even contributing to what we are looking at today, but for all of its significance, did not have the kind of impact on politics, both inside this country and internationally, as did the movement in the 1960s, where the world was able to see the United States, and the United States was incapable of effectively painting this picture of this wonderful bastion of freedom and democracy that was fighting the communists of the world and fighting against the enemy who was threatening to overturn the capitalist system. Now the transfer that struggle that we were engaged in broke the ability of the United States to do that in the 1960s. It created a powerfully significant ideological assault on U.S. imperialism, and it contributed to the struggles of peoples around the world who, in many instances, either directly or indirectly, were fighting against U.S. It contributed to those efforts and those struggles and made it necessary for the United States to try and cover itself and even retreat in some instances on some of the most glaring acts of violence and oppression against African people and against other peoples in the United States who are colonized here. The thing is that the uprisings of African people and other colonized people help to again destroy the myth of what the United States is, and it contributes to our ability to expose the United States as a settler state. That you have all these people who are oppressed, all these people who are being killed on a regular basis, all these people who are imprisoned inside this country, and the U.S. has been able, nevertheless, to get away with it because of its success in quieting the voices of the most oppressed sectors of the population. And now, again, in 2020, we see this explosion of struggle that challenges this notion of what the United States is and who the United States is, and gives us this amazing opportunity to expose that to the world. For a while now, there have been various polls taken that show that growing numbers of especially young people actually prefer what they think is socialism than capitalism. And that's because capitalism is the only thing that they've experienced. I mean, we get taught in civic classes and things like that of what capitalism is supposed to be. But the experience of growing numbers of people around the world, well, you see, even if they were not that conscious and not that concerned about what was happening to Africans and Mexicans and other people colonized here, they could not escape what was happening, the capitalist system destroying the environment, engaged in unending wars against other peoples around the world that was a threat, not only to those people who are outside of the United States, but offered threats to the security of people in the United States. 9/11 was one example, glaring example. People had to look for the first time for many people at what kind of contradictions the United States government is embroiled in and the capitalist system itself. So people have been questioning that. And growing the capitalist system, you've seen even capitalists on a regular basis in their journals trying to convince everybody that capitalism is still viable, it's still worth the while. This one of the thinking representatives of bourgeoisie, his name is, I think it's Francis Fukuyama. I can't remember the institution that he's associated with, but he has been one of the persons responsible for writing advice and position papers and things like that to inform and shape the direction of the ruling class. It's one of their thinking representatives, and he wrote something about the end of history at one juncture that presupposed that what they call this liberal democracy, U.S. imperialism, that there's nothing else to be attained. There's nothing else. Now that capitalism works in the United States, this is the end of history. There's nothing else that's going to develop. That's what he said one time. He subsequently had to revise his view of that because there does appear to be an end of history approaching, but not the one that he was thinking about. It seems to be that there's a real existential threat to the existing social system, the end of that history, the end of the history of the parasite, of a social system that's sucking the blood of the peoples. Today, we find because the capitalist system itself is in such great growing disrepute, that many of the representatives of the capitalist class, many obvious sectors, excuse me, obvious representatives of the bourgeoisie have declared themselves to be socialists of some sort or another. I mean, Bernie Sanders, of course, is the outstanding example of the socialist. He is a democratic socialist. And then there are other popular younger versions of democratic socialists who occupy as part of the political space today. And of course, what it is that we're looking at from our perspective is, again, these are really thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie who see the failures, who see the problems with the capitalist system, and they are promoting a kind of gentler capitalism that they want to call democratic socialism. There's a reason that they characterize this socialism as democratic as opposed to socialism pure and simple. And because they want to distinguish this socialism that they're talking about from the socialism that can only come as a consequence of overturning the capitalist system itself, because socialism and capitalism, two contending social systems, and they cannot occupy successfully the same social space. So if there is to be socialism, then it means that capitalism must be driven out of the same space. Capitalism must be destroyed. Socialism can only come about as a consequence of the defeat of the capitalist social system. So the people who see the failure of capitalism, but are unprepared to attack the capitalist system itself, call themselves democratic socialists, which is again a kind of gentler capitalism. And that's not the socialism that we are talking about. People talk about socialism today because capitalism is exposing itself to growing numbers of people around the world. But of course, to Mexicans, to Africans, to other colonized peoples around the world, capitalism has clearly revealed its fangs to us from its very inception. In fact, capitalism came into existence as a consequence of taking our lands and our peoples into forced labor in a very brutal and cruel way. And it is a part of the thing that has given rise to what is referred to sometimes as a superstructure, resting on a base of exploitation, on a base of colonialism, on a base of slavery and what have you. There's this superstructure, there's this whole system of ideas, culture, politics, and things like this that reflect the relationship to this economic base of slavery and colonialism. So people talk about racism, and people talk about all the terms used to characterize Africans and Mexicans and other people who are not white. It's because capitalism itself came into existence as a consequence of enslaving us and stealing our lands. And that's what thrust, for the first time in modern history, white people onto the historical agenda in a very profound and deep way. And so when we talk about socialism, we're talking about destroying that system that exploits and oppresses the vast majority of peoples on the world, but it rests upon a foundation of the enslavement, the parasitic foundation of our enslavement, whether it's called colonialism or slavery, right up front. There are certain features of capitalism that are generally recognized by people who call themselves progressives and communists and socialists. And one, of course, is that capitalism is based on, it features commodity production, that things are not produced because they're needed or not necessarily produced because they're needed. Production is not because to serve the people. All production, everything is done for profit. And so sometimes there's production that meets no real need of the people, but there's a profit that can be found there, and they'll produce it anyway, and they'll create an artificial need in the masses so that people will go out and purchase it, buy it, and what have you, for creating profit. So you have commodity production. is a main feature. And when we talk about commodity reduction, we're talking about things that are produced. A commodity is something that is produced for sale, for the market, as is said. I mean, that's why they talk in this country often about market economy, market-based economy. All the economy is there for based on production for selling something, for trade. It's not based on what the people need. You go to a hospital, hospitals are not there. People say, why can't the hospitals deal with the so-called pandemic? Hospitals are not created to deal with sick people. This hospital are created for profit. That's why you can't go to a hospital just because you're sick. You can't go to a grocery store just because you're hungry. Thing is, everything is done for profit. That's the nature of this kind of social system. So commodity production, everything is produced for sale, for commodity. Everything is informed by that, by that process. Then you have wage labor, which is something that people are familiar with. In fact, this is where much of the capitalist surplus value profit comes from, is stealing value produced by working people. People go to work and they produce stuff, but nobody gets paid for what they produce. They get paid effectively for the ability to produce, which means they get paid because enough, generally speaking, to feed them, clothe them, house them, and make it possible for them to produce their ability, reproduce their ability to come to work the next day, or to produce children who will be the workers who will come to their factories and go to their fields and plots and things like that. So wage labor is a critical aspect of what most people understand about capitalism. And part of what helps, again, along with commodity production, for us to detest capitalism. And then, of course, there is this other issue, and that's the private ownership of the means of production. So that even though you have socialized production, that is to say, people come together, even if they've never seen each other, the production process itself is socialized. People everywhere, many places, are contributing to the production of everything that happens. So you have socialized production, but you have private ownership of the ability to produce everything, food, clothing, and housing, and everything else that's needed in society. That capacity is privately owned. So you have this profound contradiction that the people who produce don't have anything, the people who don't produce own everything. And so this is something that people recognize. However, a fundamental component that's not so easily recognized is this issue of parasitism. And this is the whole production process rests upon a foundation of parasitism, that capitalism itself is a parasitic enterprise, that it came into existence not because some great God descended on the planet Earth and put all his resources into the hands of white people, or the hands of what people like to refer to as the 1%. It didn't happen that way. The fact is there had to be startup capital. And this startup capital is something that a man named Karl Marx referred to as the primitive accumulation of capital, the beginning accumulation of capital. That capital that comes as a consequence not of capitalist production, but is the starting point of capitalist production. And Marx referred to that as, in part, as turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. And then, there's references to what England did in terms of the war on China, and turned China into a nation of junkies. So with the Opium War and what have you. And there are other things that we could mention. And part of what Marx doesn't mention, interestingly, is the fact that if you look at the United States, this territory that we're on right here, this is a part of the primitive accumulation of capital itself. And the land of the indigenous peoples is a part of the primitive accumulation of capital. And this is part of what created the whole capitalist system, which makes this a really important discussion that we're having today, because most of the leftists, and certainly the colonizer leftists, do not recognize this question of parasitism. In fact, they, using a formula created much later by a man named V.I. Lenin, that presupposes that that this imperialism, that what we are experiencing, what we are talking about happening to us, is a consequence of capitalism developed to its highest stages. And the position of the African People's Socialist Party is imperialism, capitalism, that capitalism is a consequence of empire itself. Imperialism, the empire that went from Europe and went to the Americas and went to all these other, Africa and all these other places. This is where you had what Marx called the primitive accumulation of capital that started the capitalist system. So it's not capitalism, imperialism being the highest stage of capitalism in our view. In our view, it's capitalism becoming the highest stage of imperialism, of empire, etc. And so, so it's really important for us to have this discussion. I probably overtalked what is supposed to be the introduction, but I did want to say this, that during this time now where people are trying to get in front of this question and talking about, they're now socialists. We have to intervene in this discussion. We have to, especially at a time where there's so many people who are in motion. I've read recently that since May 26, there have been perhaps what was it? Something like 15 to 26 million people who have been in motion in this country, protests, demonstrations, and things like that. Several hundred per day. Several hundred people per day have been involved in actions, protests. And it's really interesting because the New York Times had a recent article that said something to the effect that and on June 6 alone, like 500,000 people in this country demonstrated, and that there's an average of 140 demonstrations a day since May 26 in this country. And at the same time, they mentioned that in most instances, it only takes 3.5% of the population to be upset and engaged in protests to overturn governments, 3.5%. But you can't overturn governments if you don't know what it is you're fighting for. If revolutionaries haven't intervened into this process, you won't be interested in overturning governments. You'll be interested in defunding the police, perhaps. You'll be interested in blocking an interstate, perhaps, doing stuff like that. You'll be interested in telling people that Black Lives Matter, but there's nothing that informs the people of what it is we're trying to do. So that's what our task is. And when we say socialism, we're saying that Bernie is a liar. He's not a socialist, and I'm being that blunt about it. And that I don't know what is in his brain, what his intention. He may be an honest opportunist, but he's an opportunist nevertheless. And there are other opportunists like that who would sacrifice the long-term interests of the working people, and certainly of African and colonized people, to overturn the whole relationship we have and offer us $15 an hour over a number of years and free healthcare, or something to that effect. That's not socialism. The reality is socialism is when the working people who produce the value become the new ruling class, who own and control the means of production and take it out of the hands of the colonizers, take it out of the hands of the oppressor, and then possibly give Bernie and his crew $15 an hour if there is enough resources after we build the hospitals and take care of all the needs of the people and the universities and clean up the streets and kill the mosquitoes that's causing malaria and other problems of oppressed peoples around the world. If there's enough resources, but Bernie is gonna have to work for a living just like the rest of us do. And maybe he can find a cave up someplace in North San Diego County where he can go after picking vegetables and stuff like that to fill the supermarkets of the workers. But the point is that there is not going to be this situation where you can have capitalism and colonialism, nor is it going to be something that you can wish into existence. It's not enough to self-declare socialist. I'm a socialist, and then, after having read a few textbooks or something to that effect, it's something that has to be fought for. That's why socialism comes as a consequence of revolution, and revolution comes as a consequence of revolutionary leadership, organization. That's what it is that we say that helps us to understand who's a socialist and who's not a socialist, despite what it is that they say. And it's this fundamental question of recognizing the parasitic base of all the capitalist enterprise that you see any place in the world. That's why this notion about a 99% versus a 1% is garbage. The fact is that while we recognize that the ordinary white people are not part of the 1%, they damn sure are not a part of the 99%, because 80% of the people on earth trying to survive of less than $10 a day, $10 or less a day. 80% of the people on the planet Earth, the majority of the people on earth do not have clean water, do not have access to electricity. It's just ridiculous and are under fire of various sorts all the time as a consequence of relationship to the social system. I've overtalked with Comrade Akile and Comrade Benjamin, but I want to just start off, and then again, this is part of the annual fundraiser for Black Power 96.3. And I'm calling on everybody who can see the value, even of this discussion that we're entering in today, even of the relationship between the African and Mexican people as being expressed through Unión de Barrio and the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. You should contribute to Black Power 96. And if you like this show, and I hope you do, this study that we do on a regular basis, just go to blackpower96.org, blackpower96.3.org, and go to donate / donate. I think that's how it goes, something like that. But please go ahead and make your contributions. Comrade Director Akile Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. And before we turn it over to Comrade Benjamin, I did want to just, appreciate that overview. And also, yeah, the website is blackpower96.org/donate. And Omali Taught Me has a $2,000 show goal for the overall $6,000 fund drive for Black Power 96. And Omali Taught Me is broadcast not only on YouTube and Facebook, but on Black Power 96 Radio. And BP 96 is ours. Black Power 96 Radio is one of many projects led by the African People's Education and Defense Fund, part of the Uhuru movement that is building political and economic power in the hands of the Black working class. I also wanted to let people know some of the things that they receive when they do donate. We have some premium thank yous for our donors. So if you donate $20 or more, you get a Black Power 96 face mask. So during this period where we need to be wearing our face masks, going into different stores, and if we're going around anyone, we want to wear a face mask. So we have Black Power 96 face masks for you at $20. If you donate 50 or more or become a new sustainer, $50 or become a new $5 a month sustainer, you get a mask plus an Omali Taught Me spiral jotter notebook with pen to keep your study notes in this handy little notebook. So you get your face mask and your notepad. If you donate $100 or more, you get the mask, you get the notepad, and you can choose one of the following books by Chairman Omali Yeshitela that also features solidarity statements from Unión de Barrio: Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, which is the chairman's newest book, and Uneasy Equilibrium and One Africa, One Nation. So you can choose out of those three books, you get a mask and a notebook. And $200 or more gets you a mask, notebook, and two of those books listed, as well as a 12x18 African flag mounted on a wooden stick to fly outside of your house, things like that. So I just wanted to let people know those amazing premium gifts if you donate during the Omali Taught Me Sunday study. So go to blackpower96.org/donate to help us meet this $2,000 goal. And with that being said, I would like to turn it over to Comrade Benjamin Prado of Unión de Barrio. Uhuru, Benjamin.
Uhuru, comrades, thank you very much again for these incredible Sunday studies. I think they're tremendously important and significant to arm our communities, with the necessary ideology to really combat, this terrible parasitic system that we live in, right? And I'm looking forward to getting that mask and that notepad. Be helpful to also, maintain. Jot down these ideas. And I think that, we really want to express, and value and appreciate the discussion and dialogue with the African People's Socialist Party, because it allows us as a political organization really to deepen the understanding of society and the world. And it allows us to bring cohesion towards building a society free from exploitation, oppression, and ignorance. It also helps us to combat the isolation that capitalism and imperialism imposes on our movements and our people, especially our struggle against our common enemy, right? And thereby, their attempt to divide and weaken our peoples and our struggles. So, this question of socialism versus capitalism, why is it important for us to build socialism? I think number one is it's that the historically and materially, socialism is based on workers as owners of the means of production, as you had clearly stated, Comrade Chairman, and the concept of workers in power, right? Organized and planned distribution of national wealth that's produced by workers to build, a society of relative equitable standards of living that is based on the principles from each according to their work, to each according to their need, right? Society where there is no rich or poor and the wealth of the nation is shared amongst the people. That's really critical when we consider the society that we live in today, right, under a capitalist system that creates this grotesque levels of social inequality. And this discussion is really timely, specifically because of this whole question of democratic socialism, right, that was put forward as a campaign, and we really want to challenge the idea that somehow there exists the concept of socialism for the rich, right? You can't have socialism for the rich. It's a contradiction in terms, because when we talk about the concept of socialism, it is workers in power, workers in control of the ability to create, produce, and recreate our material existence. And this concept and idea that socialism is for the rich, or somehow that whatever monies come out of the nation state and handed over to the rich, somehow that is an expression of socialism, and that is absolutely not the case. That what we see today in terms of massive bailouts for banks is capitalism, and we have to say it in no uncertain terms that it is capitalism as stealing the resources and bailing itself out from the crisis that was imposed and created by this sick parasitic system itself. The parasitic relationship between those, it is really the expression of the parasitism of between those that work and those that do not work. The most primitive, capitalism is the most primitive and savage method of wealth accumulation that is the expression of the worst type of social existence based on extractive, exploitative, and dishonest relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed, the exploited and the exploiter, between the worker and the boss, between the slave and the slave master, between the colonizer and the colonized. And so there is this irreconcilable contradiction between the oppression and exploitation of workers who produce everything around us, whether it be the home that we live in, whether it be the road that we go down on, whether it be the food that is produced, the buildings that people go into is produced by workers. And the problem that we see is obviously that workers have been, our labor has been extracted to the point where we do not have a decent standard of living. And now that this whole issue of who's going to be the candidates, right, Trump or Biden, between the two capitalist political parties, really we have to look at that Trump and Biden really represent the same interest of the slave master, the colonizer, the oppressor, the exploiter. The only difference is that Trump, is probably a little bit more honest than the Democrats, frankly. They're openly white nationalists, just like the Democrats have historically been white nationalists. But now, because of the crisis, becomes more evident today that their level of hostility, their level of imposing a system of exploitation is crystal clear, especially if we take into consideration the current economic, social, political, ecological, and now health crisis that is exposing this absolutely grotesque levels of social inequality. Just to give an example, right? I mean, I think that this statistic actually, puts into perspective why capitalism must be destroyed, right? Oxfam uh, uh, reported a couple of years ago, or actually last year, that just 1% of humanity owns over half of the world's wealth, and that 20% own 94.5% of that wealth, while the remaining 80% of humanity must make do with just 4.5% of the world's wealth. This is capitalism. When you create such disgusting, horrendous, grotesque inequalities, we know, and because we've been feeling it all our lives, is that we have to get rid of this terrible oppressive system. The escalation of class warfare really represents the crisis of capitalism itself. It is driving it is really the billionaire class that has transferred all of the world's crisis onto the shoulders of working people the world over, right? And so for us, it's really important to see beyond this idea that capitalism is the only system that we need to support, or that we need to conform to. In fact, if we look at other social systems, if we look at other countries, and there's a reason why the United States always imposes sanctions and restrictions for people to go and see other social systems. I'm referring specifically about Cuba. They won't let you go, or the North American population go and see what socialism really looks like, because we know that they're afraid that if they see workers in power, that they see an actual political reference of how a society can be organized, can be established to actually build a society that is sustainable, that responds to the needs of workers. Their fragile political, economic, and social system will be challenged here as well. And we're very open about this, that we've had delegations go and see what's happening in our, at least in our continent, right? We've gone to Cuba, we've gone to Venezuela, where the ideas of building a socialist society, a socialist future, is actually here. It's now, and we have to actually engage in conversations and discussions with our comrades down in the South to figure out, how we continue to build a society that respects and represents the interest of working people. And if you just look at socialism in its historical context of building through revolution, our capacity as working people to have land, to feed our families, to put a roof over our head, to create education. Every social revolution that we can see and study requires workers taking back their land, taking back their labor, and building and nationalizing their natural resources. The Mexican Revolution of 1910, for example, had that objective. It was hijacked by the bourgeois capitalist class at some point, but it's important because social revolution is necessary to overturn this system of exploitation. And socialism cannot live in isolation to a international project. Socialism is not just a question of just doing it in one location or one place, but actually creating international solidarity amongst workers to meet the needs of humanity, because we are growing exponentially much larger, and much rapid pace because of this industrialized society that we've lived in. But whether it be the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Vietnam, Chile, Angola, Venezuela or Bolivia, the struggle to build a socialist future required the participation of the great majority of the masses of working people in order to make that happen. Just obviously, some of the countries that I named, have been attacked by capitalism, by imperialism, and to either stunt its development, or outright have been invaded, and in some of the cases, coups have been taken or done and conspired against the presidents who were creating a different society. And the experience of Chile under Allende in the 1970s is important and significant, because it is through here where you made reference to, the end of time from, forget his name.
Fukuyama.
That's right, Fukuyama was the experience of Chile, right? The need to a president in the form of Salvador Allende, who nationalized the copper mines, was seen as an affront to the capitalist imperialist project, and so he was overthrown, right? Just last year, in November, actually, a couple months ago, Evo Morales, the indigenous president of Bolivia, was overthrown as well, right, by the United States. And why did they overthrow them? Because they saw that that the economic project that they were building was socialist in character, was putting workers in power, and Evo Morales said it very clearly at the UN, with Trump sitting right next to him, that capitalism must die or it will kill humanity, right? It's either capitalism, either we as a species cease to exist, or and capitalism will kill us, right? And so we have to build an alternative, and that alternative is socialism. One of the really important unity projects that has been happening throughout this continent is the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Nuestra America. And again, it's a socialist project that has the objective of building our people's capacity throughout Nuestra America, throughout Latin America, to build an alternative to the neoliberal economic political system that is extracting tremendous amounts of wealth from Latin America and coming here into and extracting it for the purposes of sustaining the US standard of living, right? And at the end of the day, if we look at capitalism, how can we summarize it? Is capitalism is theft. There's no doubt about it. I mean, even today, as Venezuela, as Cuba attempt to build this socialism, as has been termed 21st century socialism, we see blockades, we see sanctions, creating, in the case of Cuba, economic, commercial, financial blockades that attempt to impose economic strain on the population. And if you look at what is it that Cuba has done in the past 60 years of revolution, it has prepared its population, has educated its population, it has created massive amounts of doctors to attend to the population, but not only in Cuba, but also internationally, right? In this time of pandemic, we see how socialism is the only system capable of dealing with the issues of this health global pandemic, sending hundreds, not thousands of doctors throughout the world in order to deal with the issue of pandemic. Now, what other country, what other social system, if not socialism, that has been able to prioritize the needs of people to be able to go and send people to deal with this issue of global pandemic, when the United States, and if we look at just the numbers today, something like nearly 3 million people infected. We see people dying. I think it's 130,000 people dead. That's capitalism. It's not able even to respond to the basic needs, health needs of the population, but yet Cuba, the small island, uh, is able to go and send its doctors throughout the world in order to be able to attend to the needs and be able to really fight this pandemic. Just a couple of days ago, Europe or some court in England uh, said that Venezuela's gold that they had deposited as part of its international reserves in a bank in England was going to hold it, was going to in fact give it to the opposition that supports that is the opposition to the current president Nicolas Maduro. That the Bank of England decided to steal, for all intents and purposes, something in the amount of $14 billion in gold, and without any real justification except that they don't like the economic system that Nicolas Maduro is advancing. And so that's why we do unite with the Bolivarian revolution in opposing the sanctions, the embargoes, and the open, outright theft and piracy that capitalism represents. And it's really important, I think, for our organization to really lay out that when we talk about socialism, people, sometimes squirm only because of the imperialist media that has imposed this idea that somehow our communities, somehow that our society, because we live in a capitalist society, have this definition of democracy, that somehow capitalism is the highest expression of democracy, which we disagree with, right? We strive to overturn the current bourgeois definition of democracy as being exclusively limited to simply electoral procedure, right? That our democracy is a participatory democracy that transcends the narrow concepts of citizenship and imposed political borders. We actively reject any and all governments, laws, national borders, and definitions of citizenship that deny, the full enjoyment of our human and democratic rights. And one of those democratic rights is to participate in the economy. In this society, it is said that if you work hard, you will do well. And if you look at our communities, one of the most hardest working communities, especially those that don't have documents, or what are referred to as undocumented workers, are the ones that have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And we don't see the benefits of what capitalism has been talking about, of having honorable, dignified standards of living. In fact, we see, as you had mentioned, not only in this earlier, but in the previous discussions, that some of the hardest workers, at least here in California, who work the fields, and other parts of the United States who work in the fields, do not have basic, decent human living conditions, but yet they're the ones who produce all the food that we see in the supermarkets, and that make all those people that don't work, right? I made reference that there's people, is the relationship between people that work and people that don't work. The people that don't work, those capitalists who really just move money around in banks and accumulate massive amounts of money, are the ones who live off of those hard workers that are out in the field. So for us, it's really critical that socialism can only come about through a participation of working people to overturn that economic system. So for us, it's really important and critical that we make a distinction that socialism can only come about through participation in the democratic political system. And when we reference, especially now, as what's happening even today in building the capacity of organizations to build socialism, we do think that it's important, the importance of an anti-colonial socialist media source to expose the system of capitalism for its undemocratic nature in which we live in. So I think I do believe I already am coming to time, right? I think I have a couple more minutes. I do want to make reference that that for our communities, for the character of building socialism, when we see the participation of workers in Venezuela to defend its process, when we see the struggles of the Cuban people to defend their process in the light of so much slander in the society, so much media that is attacking our communities, that is attacking those social economic systems like Cuba and Venezuela. It's really important to use these media's outlets, right? The Black Power 96.3, even the Facebook or other media sources to express and challenge that slander that is many times done to somehow dissuade us from even looking at those economic systems as alternatives. And so we appreciate this opportunity, and we thank the opportunity to really unite with this struggle to build socialism. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Benjamin. And we're going to allow for discussion among both you and the chairman. And I just really want to appreciate that point that that closing point that you just made, because even right now in this discussion, there are a lot of people who are confused about socialism, and that is due in part to, the capitalist system and the slander, and including against countries such as Cuba and Venezuela and all these other places. It obviously the agenda is to uphold capitalism, and our media and our ability to control the information that gets put out there helps to not only demystify what socialism truly is and what it looks like, but gives us the ability to inform and actually communicate and build for socialism. So Chairman, before we open up for discussion among you and Benjamin, may I just announce some of the donors that we've gotten so far?
Yes.
All right, Uhuru. So I just want to appreciate everyone who has contributed to the mission of Black Power 96, and to the chair that broadcast the chairman's study every Sunday. It is a regular program of Black Power 96 where it not only is live on the airwaves that hit the local African community in St. Petersburg, Florida, but it's accessible via our radio app and website. So in the event that Facebook and even YouTube try to prevent us from having these discussions, we've created the capacity to be able to have these discussions on our own terms with things that we control in our possession. So that's what Black Power 96 is. That's what you support when you contribute to it. And anywhere around the world, no matter where you're located, you can access Black Power 96 with that app, with that website. So if you support the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study and support the mission of Black Power 96, you should donate right now, blackpower96.org/donate. The Omali Taught Me Sunday Study is a regular program that has a goal to raise $2,000 of our overall $6,000 goal for the fund drive of July, from now to July 18th. And so far, we have raised during this discussion $820. So we're almost to that halfway mark. So we have donations from, I just want to recognize Chimaranga Salambao in St. Petersburg with a $25 donation. Johnny X in St. Petersburg with a $50 donation. We have James Waller with a $25 donation. Janaba in Detroit with a $75 donation. We have Kenya with an $100 in Lakeland yes, Lakeland, Florida, with an $100 donation. We have Comrade Benjamin with an $100 donation. We have Comrade Kinge Maele with $25 donation. Kemba Shabanda with $20 donation. We had a donation from Nasir Alamin in Kuwait for $25. So Uhuru Nasir, thank you so much. We have a donation from Comrade Lisa Watson in Minneapolis with a $50 donation. Uhuru Lisa. We have a donation from our APSP Midwest Regional Representative, Comrade Malika Alexander in St. Louis with a $20 donation. Uhuru Malika. We have a contribution from the African People Solidarity Committee Chairwoman Penny Hess in St. Louis with an $100 donation. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny. We have Comrade Karen Castillo in San Diego with a donation of $20. So Uhuru, and she says, thank you for providing guidance and education to the people. Que viva APSP, long live Brown and Black unity against our common oppressor. Uhuru. We have Daniel Kenyon, that's my cousin, in St. Petersburg, Florida with a $15 donation. Thank you, DJ. We have a donation from Comrade Allison Haney, who's the Secretary General of the African People Solidarity Committee in Philadelphia with a $50 donation. And she says, salute Omali taught me in Black Pride 96, the African Revolution speaking for itself and leading the world to a new socialist system, drive colonialism to its grave, reparations from the colonizer nation now. Uhuru Allison. We have a contribution from Comrade Bakrio Lutunji, who is the APSP Western Regional Representative in Oakland with a $20 donation. And he says, we are winning. We are. And we have a donation from Comrade Suchas in Sacramento, California with an $100 donation. So Uhuru, comrades, thank you so much for your contributions so far. Continue to donate to blackpower96.org. And I'll remind you of these premium gifts in a little bit, but I want to go ahead now and turn it over to both the chairman and Benjamin for some discussion before we open up to our online viewers. Uhuru.
I'd just like to reiterate what I think is the significance of this discussion occurring between the party and Union de Barrio to establish the fact that we have representatives of two colonized people who are firmly standing on the side of socialism and for socialism and opposition to capitalism and what that means. Also, I just want to say that much of what we've talked about up to now I think you can have this discussion and hear this discussion, parts of it, you know, within most circles that talk about socialism and to some extent that might talk about Marxism versus capitalism, what have you. But part of what I think distinguishes the worldview of the African People's Socialist Party and where we're trying to go, and I think I've heard this, you know, aspects of it, if not in totality, from Union de Barrio, is the recognition that our investigation and analysis of society, you know, absolutely requires us to use a scientific approach, a scientific process. We refer to it as historical materialism. That the starting point for us is the role that Africa and African engagement with in contemporary history, how it has contributed to the rise of capitalism itself. That is to say that our starting point is recognition that capitalism has its basis, its foundation in the attack on Africa, the attack on the peoples of the Americas and various other peoples around the world. That's the starting point. And that this thing has created divergent views of what is success in the world. Like, for example, many of the white people of the colonizer nation are feeling pain and have been feeling pain for a while. But you'll see there's a relationship with the pain that many white people feel and the success of the struggles of the oppressed peoples, or if not the success of the struggles, the limitations placed on the ability the system, the capitalist colonial system, to extort value, to steal resources, from oppressed peoples around the world. And so it places it has an impact on the living conditions of the colonizers, all the colonizers. And as typical, what the ruling class will do is try to shift that balance onto the shoulders of the colonized. But the tighter the restrictions on the ability of them to extract value, sometimes you will see them even cannibalizing themselves. You see this some of the extended oppression or exploitation even into the ranks of the colonizer population. When the colonizer often is pushed into political motion, protests, etc., it's because the capitalist system increasingly cannot meet what they have long considered to be their aspirations, their needs, and things like that. That's because, again, of the inability or the lessening ability of the system to extract value from us, whether that's in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, even inside the borders of the United States. And so you can see this protest movement, and you can see this is at times like this when we all become the 99%, when that kind of thing happens. And that's why we've seen things like this happen in the past, and that it's been possible for the system to quiet the protests, to quiet the struggles of the colonizer population that often is referred to workers by simply, that's part of what taking resources from the colonized means, trying to shift that to satisfy what the white population requires. And that it is possible and has been possible in so many instances of the white population to realize its aspirations while still maintaining the colonial relationship that Mexicans, Africans, and other people have with the United States. That's why we think it's so critical to understand that the foundation, the thing that holds it all up, is the colonial domination by Europe, and more specifically now, US, even though in a shaky foundation, to hold up this relationship that exists between us and the rest of them. Now, people protest about Trump, but they don't protest about what Trump is doing to Venezuela. They don't protest what Trump is doing to Cuba. They don't protest what Trump is doing to peoples around the world. They don't protest. I mean, they say they protest the so-called wall that Trump is talking about, but not because it's keeping Mexicans from their own land. The fact is that I'm always surprised when they talk about a wall, because I've been to the borders. I've seen these extensive fences and guards and patrols and special police that they set up there. I don't hear the Democrats protesting about that. In fact, Barack Obama was the most, initiated the most extensive assault and kicking Mexicans out than any president had ever done before. So it is all of that rests upon the system of our peoples. And so the critical thing, the truth of the matter is that every dream of success, every aspiration of a good life that the colonizer has. When I say the colonizer, I'm not talking about Trump. I'm not talking about Biden. I'm talking about white people in general. For its success, they require the oppression and the maintenance more efficiently, if possible, of the colonial relationship. Every dream, unless it's a dream, and it never is, that supposes that they're gonna not talk about a damn border, but the stolen land, the Mexico and all of it, that's, stolen, and the indigenous people in these concentration camps, and African people. If that's central to the discussion, then they're talking about repairing the needs. It's a white rights movement. It's a colonizer movement that sometimes calls itself communist, socialist, and what have you, but it never is one that challenges the relationship of power that exists between the oppressed and the oppressor, the colonized and the colonizer. And all the white people are a part of the colonizer nation. And this is not slander against them. In fact, you can be a part of the colonizer nation, but you're obligated to fight against colonialism if you're on the side of the oppressed, you see? And so that's why we're not talking about racial politics in that sense. We're saying you can be on the side of the colonized, but you gotta fight against colonialism, and to fight for more rights for white people, whether it's women, homosexuals, or white workers, is not the same as being on the side of the colonized. And this has been a critical question. And I appreciate what the Vietnamese understood and really, I believe, provided a lot of leadership for us, because they recognized that in Vietnam, they had an organization, a party that had responsibility for national liberation on the one hand, freeing the Vietnamese nation on the one hand, but also turning that struggle for national liberation into a struggle for socialism, to a struggle for communism, for a new society. And that was contained in that struggle all the time. And even as we look in the African revolutionary movement, we see that within the struggle for national liberation, there's a class struggle that's raging all the time, even inside the struggle, even with people who we work with relatively closer. We're talking about people taking up different class positions that should they prevail, should their leadership prevail, then we'll simply have a different face on the same social system that oppresses and exploits the peoples of the world. So I think from our perspective, that's something that's important to recognize. And then we hear often that the problem that Black people have, for example, we used to be criticized. There was one prominent guy who, I can't think of his name right now, talked about benign neglect in the 1960s. But they talk about how a problem that we have as Africans is because we think in terms of the collective as opposed to individuals, because they say success in society from their perspective is that this drive by every individual to get over, to make it at the expense of everybody else. That's the thing that they call the basis for progress. We say that's a lie, you know, that progress, we believe, it has to be for the collective. And the fact is that the system will allow Africans to succeed as individuals, but they will not allow the group to succeed. That's what colonialism is all about. So you can become successful, but it's always at the expense of the group. And so that's something that we're looking at. They talk about, I mentioned this thing about the collective because we are also criticized in Venezuela, in Africa, in our communities, barrios, for a failure because we need more capitalism. And what we are saying is that that is capitalism. That's right. That poverty, that brutality, that murder, that starvation, that homelessness, that deprivation of anything that represents the dignity of humanity that's been imposed on the world, that is capitalism, and that has to go. And finally, this, that we think that a problem in our struggles for a while up to now is not clearly understand this question of colonialism being the foundation of the whole capitalist system. That we've seen people achieve what we've seen socialists lead revolutionary struggles and socialists come to power. But they had socialists in this tiny island in a shark-infested sea of capitalism around the world. And it's not like capitalism, socialism prevails. Capitalism is the dominant social system. It starves Cuba. It places limitations on the production of all the peoples around the world and what we can produce and what we can have. And so I think that many revolutionaries in the past didn't quite understand that, sort of took this Marxist view that seizing state power, overturning the system where they were located would result in socialist consequences, and that's never happened anywhere. We've seen socialists take power, and that has made some improvement on the lives of the people, but just think, one of the reasons they would starve Cuba is because they don't want all the workers of the world to see this as a model that they could imitate. Even what happened in Korea with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, how they treated Korea, how they crushed, they placed all kinds of sanctions, and they raised up this puppet regime that they call South Korea, to put money in it, put industry in it, to raise it up and say, look, this is what you can do if you stay dominated by white power. You can be this successful. Look at what's happening over there with the other Koreans who are starving because we've created all kinds of quarantines and economic sanctions and stuff like that to make sure that they don't share in the world economy, because the capitalist economy is the dominant world economy today, even though it is the dominant world economy, as shakily as that may seem. So I just want to say, I think that's extremely important, that we don't suffer from a lack of capitalism, we suffer from the existence of capitalism. And that this notion that somehow capitalism has provided the most rapid and greatest progress in terms of the productive capacity of humanity is bogus. That what capitalism has done is thrust millions and millions of people out of a productive process. It's killed, murdered, maimed, locked us up in places on the continent of Africa, an entire continent of people. You know, more than 1 billion people locked in a permanent state of starvation while all the resources being sucked out of there. How many Africans died during the whole process of the slave trade? How many people are being starved throughout the Americas and every place else who are left out of a productive, self-serving productive process? Capitalism did not result. I don't give a damn. You can't show me a professor that can convince me that capitalism resulted in some amazing rapid economic growth for the planet Earth. In fact, it took most of the planet Earth out of the productive process, self-serving productive process, and made us slaves to a social system that benefited by our slavery, by the impairment on our capacity to produce. So I think that it's really important for us to have this discussion, and that for us to destroy the monopoly on this discussion around socialism and communism and capitalism that has usually been dominated by the colonizer nation, by professors and dilettantes from the colonizer nation. I think that's really important for us to do, to have this discussion right now. And that we cannot satisfy our aspirations as the people without revolution. There's no way out of it. And we want rapid production, rapid development. We have to have it. You know, I saw something a while ago, not too long ago, that said that it would take 228 years for the economic capacity of African people in this country to equal that of white people. Well, first of all, we don't have 228 years. Capitalism doesn't have 228 years if we have anything to do with it. And it's just an extraordinary, crazy thing. We don't have that, and it's not going to take that. We've been producing all along. It's not like Africans and Mexicans haven't been producing. We just haven't been producing for ourselves. That's and right. Part of this revolutionary process is for us to reproduce our own capacity to live. We got to take back our resources from the colonizer. We gotta expropriate the expropriators, and we're gonna have far fewer jails because there are far fewer capitalists, you know, who will be filling those jails, those who make it to that far in the punitive process that will be established after the revolution. So anyway, I just think it's important. This discussion is extremely important, and people, if you think it's important, then I'm still want to call on everybody to support Omali taught me the study, support Black Power 96 by going to blackpower96.org/donate and make a contribution. Give us a lot of money. Uhuru.
Comrade, you know, I think it's really good, you know, what you had referenced, right? The whole question for us to expropriate the expropriator. You know, I mentioned that capitalism is theft, and absolutely no uncertain terms, that's exactly what it is. You can't be a billionaire without having stolen anything, without having stolen resources, wealth, and labor, right? And there's a lot of development in terms of technology and science, but it's never put at the service of the people. It's always put at the service of empire and capitalism. You have all these smart weapons now that are very precise, that cowardly go and assassinate, kill people halfway around the world. and yet the conditions of working people, even here in the United States, right? You have a tremendous amount of suffering in the form of homelessness in the face of this opulence. You can go down the street here in San Diego or even downtown LA or anywhere in any major city, and you'll see homelessness in the face of this huge, giant, multi-million dollar condos, uh, in the centers of cities, or even go to any supermarket nowadays, and they don't even have a person attend to you as you check out, right? They have all this technology, and but the benefits never transfer to working people, right? It's always an attack. It's always a way of how to cut spending so that they can maximize profits, right? That's the model. And how do we measure progress if all the science, technology is being produced and developed by workers, right? But it never benefits us as workers. But yet, uh, more billionaires are becoming even that much more massive amounts of wealth in their pockets, right? Whether it be the those Zuckerbergs or Bezos or even Trump, right? They're extracting all this wealth that our peoples produce, but yet and there's no benefit for peoples and communities to have a better conditions of life. So how do you measure progress when there is more technology, but there's much more poverty, oppression, exploitation, and people having to leave, their countries because of invasions, wars, and occupations. That is creating such strain on everybody's ability to, or the great majority of people's ability to live with a decent standard of living, a basic standard of living. And we're not talking about this opulence and uh, two cars and whatever, right? We're talking about basic needs: healthcare, housing, education, that should be universal, right? And we believe that socialism offers that, right? We've seen that because you go to Venezuela, they're building houses, they're building homes, right? More than 3 million built under the socialist program of Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro under a socialist project. Healthcare universalized, not only in Cuba but now as part of this relationship of the Bolivarian alliance. Education as making it accessible, knowledge and science to develop a society that is much more equitable. And the reality is that if we continue on this path of capitalism as a species, we're destroying our environment, we're destroying the ecological the system, the ecological necessity for our existence is being decimated, precisely because of that extractive kind of relationship that capitalism imposes on our society. So even conditions of life on the planet Earth diminish every day that capitalism is allowed to exist. So the sooner, and I agree with you, that we don't have the luxury of waiting 200 more years or anything like that. And I don't even think we have 50. We need to do it as soon as possible and overturn this relationship and make sure that we do create a balance. I really appreciate the book, right? An uneasy equilibrium, because it exposes that horrendous relationship that this sick capitalist system has on the rest of humanity, and humanity's taking back our resources. That's why we uphold the struggles of the peoples around the world to take back and nationalize their natural resources. And yeah, maybe certain people here in the U.S. standard of living will go down, but that improves the conditions of the great majority of the people on this planet Earth, and that's really critical. That the sooner that peoples around the world take back their resources and implement state policy and state power under socialism, can there be a more equitable distribution of the wealth to be able to reproduce and recreate a decent level of existence and really move towards progress rather than this, this horrendous system that currently oppresses the great majority of us.
Yeah, I think we have to think about even what that means in terms of the standard of life for people being temporarily reduced, because it will happen to some level temporarily, but then we can really have rapid development, really rapid development. Look at all of Africa, all of the Americas, and the possibility. First of all, everybody could go to work tomorrow with an actual socialist revolution that presupposes the absolute necessity for the peoples, the workers of the world, as opposed to how it's been defined. I believe the essential workers have always been the essential workers. I believe that looking at the development of capitalism from the vantage point of the colonized helps us to have a much better understanding of progress and what development is and the foundation of the whole capitalist system. I think the foundation of the capitalist system have been those of us who've dug the mines, who've been in the fields, who've built and created everything, as opposed to like what the Marxists like to talk about in terms of the point of production, where the focus of what they call exploitation surplus value. We say it's not the point of production, but the point of the bayonet. That's that the colonized people have been. We have been the driving force that there would be not. I mean, the concentrated value. I mean, you just look at Steve Jobs and what have you. And you say, well, look at what's happened as a consequence of this genius and what have you. And you look at what's happening to us. Look at Congo, where the resources come from that creates the computers and stuff like that. Look at what's happened to the peoples of the world. This is concentrated value that we see locked in Europe and building, like amazing edifices, throughout Europe, while we don't even have clean water and paved streets and stuff like that. And I want us to even look at the issue of whether or not there has been even this amazing development in technology under this capitalist system. Because how many scientists have died at the border? How many scientists have died, or potential scientists are being starved to death? To presuppose that somehow this technology that we are looking at now is so meaningful. Makes an assumption that that the white man is the only one who could have done that, would have had an interest in this, while we have an interest in development. We have an interest in it, but we've been killed and we've been locked up in concentration camps and what they call reservations and things like that. Technology has been stunted as a consequence of that. Not only has it been stunted, but it has been misdirected, because the capitalist system itself has a particular interest in what technology should provide, as opposed to systems that would be under the leadership of the workers, of the colonized workers. And so, yeah, I just think that that this is part of the discussion, that we really have an opportunity to develop and to contribute to anything that wants to look at issues like socialism versus capitalism. And it is the essential workers, if you will, who, taking command of this discussion. I mean, the colonizer cannot be allowed to speak for us. They have a monopoly on every damn thing, on power, on our resources. And I think about how even Marx himself, this, but, as he's writing Capital, explaining the development of the world economy and explaining from their perspective how even human society has moved from, in this, vertical way, et cetera, and that come to conclusion that presupposes that the future of humanity is dependent upon the industrialized working class, coming to power, overthrowing the bourgeoisie. But even as he's writing his book, it's been funded in part by Frederick Engels' daddy. And Frederick Engels' daddy was a capitalist who got much of his money from Black people picking cotton. I mean, this is a literal truth. So here you have Marx, who, and I like Marx, but here you have Marx being able to be in the library in London, probably built by Africans, and studying as a consequence of monies that's given to him by capitalists who makes his money exploiting African enslaved labor and what have you. This is part of what we're dealing with, why we come to different kinds of positions, not because Marx was necessarily wrong in terms of the method of investigation and analysis that he used, but his starting point in the place he was located in the process gave him a different perspective and understanding and than it would give us. And certainly nobody who's sitting up in what might be called Angola being kidnapped would consider ourselves the primitive accumulation of capital. Can you see the enslaved? Can you see the indigenous people here writing about the development of human society and capitalism coming into existence through the primitive accumulation of capital, which is some kind of summation of the horrors that has been visited upon Africans and indigenous people around the world? No, we'd have a whole different view of that. We wouldn't sum up development in that fashion, because the way we experience it, this whole notion of a primitive accumulation of capital that Marx uses to talk about the starting point of the capitalist system, make us more or less a footnote to the history of the development of the white world. That ain't who we are. And we starting off, we don't discuss ourselves as some kind of primitive accumulation. For us, we become the subjects of history, not the objects of history. When we become, that is the colonized people. We've been objects of history that's been written by European, no matter how nice they may be, no matter how benign they may be, no matter how well-intentioned they may be, they located in a different place in the whole production process and come to a different conclusion because of that. And Marx, as somebody who believes in dialectic and historical materialism, I think would conclude that as well. He just didn't, he just didn't have the ability to do that. I believe Mao would have put him in the fields with the peasants doing a little work to come closer to a relationship.
Right, production, right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, we do uphold the historical and dialectical method, right, of analysis. Historical and dialectical because it's scientific, right? And but it's true, right? What is our relationship to production? I think that's that is critical, so that this way we can, the material world in which we live in is created, everything, right? Whether it be this computer, whether it be this, four walls, whether it be the road that we're driving, is workers who are producing that. Now, as indigenous peoples, Mexicans living here in what we consider occupied Mexico, I think that for us is critical because, we create or a worldview has been created for us to think that somehow, we are foreigners on our own land. But when we look at the land issue and the land question and our relationship to production, we are the ones who are sustaining, maintaining empire. And at the point where we create enough consciousness and organization that we just simply need to turn around and say, we're the majority. We need to just take, what is ours, and the ability to. We already have the ability to produce. It's just a question of how do we direct that production to make sure that it gets to the masses of people in a way that empowers and creates an alternative economy. Get rid of the slave master, for all intents and purposes, the oppressor, the exploiter, right? That consistently extracts our wealth. And one of the things, with all these in the last couple weeks, just looking back, and with the political campaign and climate, right, that we're living in, there is no really, none of those candidates inspire absolutely anything for us to go and support any of those, right? And we know that because they're capitalist parties, capitalist political parties, and I'm referring to the Democrats and Republicans, right? And it's interesting how you had mentioned right now, or earlier actually, was the whole issue of Biden and the Democrats, and the deportations of under Obama, right? And it's true, if we look at just every period, whether it be just recent past, not the long historical one, but from Clinton, right? The Clinton crime bill Biden was an author of one of the most vicious, hostile policies that today is expressing itself in the form of all these murders and lynchings and attacks on the African people, but yet is considered and promotes himself as the candidate of the African community, right? And we know that that's not true. But we have to ensure that masses of African and masses of Mexicans can see uh, uh, through that through those lies, and be able to invest ourselves in organization that is dedicated to building a revolution, dedicated towards building socialism, that is dedicated for the interest, the class interest of our communities. Uh, when they talked about uh, Obama, right, consolidating ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It is a specialized force that attacks Mexicans because it subjects us to these colonial laws that continue to oppress our communities in the form of making our working people, quote, illegal, right? And when you make a population illegal, how are we supposed to survive? We don't sell our labor, and then have to sell our labor even cheaper because of that fear that they keep over us, that the day maybe one day immigration will come and pick you up, right? And we've seen that happen at supermarkets, where immigration and customs enforcement come into a supermarket. We have bakers, we have produce people, we have uh, you know, people the butchers that were arrested, lined up, right, because of the colonial imposed condition of legality or illegality in this instance, right? And so, he consolidated that, right, under Obama. So, and then provided this well-oiled machinery to this pig, Trump, to then continue the cycle of colonial domination. And so as workers, this system just does not work for us. In no uncertain terms, it is a system that must go, that must be destroyed, that must be overturned, and it is the workers who should and must then build an alternative economy.
Yeah. Now, Obama, is also the guy who consolidated AFRICOM.
Yeah.
I mean, AFRICOM was there, but Obama is the one who really put it to work to dominate the whole African continent, to make sure the status quo continues. That was the objective, of course, to protect the theft of resources from Africa, from China, and then, of course, from the African people ourselves, so we don't have access to that. Obama is the one who did that. So he gave a black face to imperialism, and that was enough for a lot of people who call themselves communists and who call themselves black nationalists to have imperialism functioning in white face. And I think that's one of the reasons this is such an important discussion that we're having today as well. And one thing that I hope we contribute to is limiting the ability of the colonial bosses to create contradictions over resources between the Africans and Mexican population, because the colonial capitalists control the entire economy. I've heard Africans say, well, the Mexicans took our job. No, if you had a job, a Mexican couldn't take it. It's the capitalists who took your job, and they do it in a certain way that contributes to exacerbate contradictions or create contradictions between Mexicans and African people and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that part of what we can do is to help people understand that. And I hate this term called duopoly, because it ain't no duopoly, it's one power. And it's like good cop, bad cop. They use these this single instrument that has two heads to it, like in the form of the Democrat Republican Party. That's the bourgeoisie. That's the bourgeoisie that you're looking at. And so I see Comrade Director Akile is sitting there in the background, and I think she's signaling us to shut up.
For sure, I could never do that, but I do want to make sure that well, I mean, this is just a really dynamic discussion, and lots of people, I think, are just really gelled and listening to it right now. And as we stated before, it is really timely. I just wanted to make sure that we can acknowledge these donors we've got coming in, and also to encourage new donors. And I wanted to also be able to show, I know I mentioned some of the premium gifts earlier, but it might also help to see them as well, to know what you're getting. So if my engineer could get them up on the screen. So a $20 donation gets you a Black Power 96 face mask again, and a $50 donation gets you the mask and this Omali Taught Me notebook right here to take all your notes during these studies. So you get a $100 donation gets you a mask, a jotter, and one of these 3 books, Vanguard and Uneasy Equilibrium, or One Africa, One Nation. That's $100 or more. Donating $200 or more gets you a mask, a jotter, 2 of those 3 books, and an African flag that you can be waving high and proud to, you know, building the African nation, saying I'm an African. That's what you get with a $200 donation, mask, jotter, 2 of those books, and an African flag. So I mean, those prizes are just incredible, and gifts are just so incredible. And you know, the things that you're hearing today in this discussion, you know, are things that the chairman has been writing about for years, and it's in those books. And I mentioned earlier that they also contain solidarity statements from Union del Barrio. So you get the benefit of, you know, that, you know, seeing all of that, including the, you know, this relationship right now through this discussion. So those are what you get when you donate to Black Power 96 today. And I want to recognize some sustaining members of Black Power 96. These are people that donate, you know, have a monthly contribution coming out to sustain the radio station. In St. Petersburg, we have myself as a sustaining member, DJ Eddie, the best blind DJ on the planet. We have Comrade Jesse Neville, the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, Comrade Ali Aiello, and Comrade Janice Kant, and that's all in St. Petersburg. In St. Louis, we have Casey Mackey, Comrade Raya Fogarty, and Kitty Riley. And other sustaining members, Nyabinga in North Carolina, Renee Nassar in Philadelphia, Leah Fifield in Minneapolis, Marissa in Seattle, Mads in Portland, John in Illinois, Sandy in Seattle, Stephanie in Oakland, Kenyon in Orlando, and Matum in Philadelphia. So those are our monthly sustainers to this radio station. And you can become a sustainer today also at blackpower96.org. So some donations that we've gotten in through the course of this study. We have Matsamela Odom with $25, located in San Diego, Uhuru Matsamela. We have Comrade Renee Nassar in Philadelphia with $50, Uhuru Comrade Renee. We have Comrade Janice Kent in St. Petersburg, Florida with $100, Uhuru Comrade Janice. We have Comrade Johan in Largo, Florida with $100, Uhuru Johan. We have this bad sister right here, Tiana Africa in San Diego, California with $10. And she says, I support Black Power 96 Radio because it speaks to the interests of African people. And I learn so much about myself as an African revolutionary every time I tune in. Uhuru Tiana. We have Janelle in West Hartford, Connecticut with $20 and says, Uhuru, I look forward to listening to this broadcast. Been tuning in to Omali Taught Me on Facebook. Uhuru Janelle. We have Comrade Alikia in St. Petersburg with $20. We have AG in Boston with $300. Uhuru AG in Boston. And they say Uhuru. So Uhuru, thank you so much for that contribution. And all of these people will be getting one of those premium gifts that they just saw up on the screen. We have Comrade Lisa Davis with the Black is Back Coalition in Newark, New Jersey with $50. So Uhuru. And we have Sister Belinda Parker Brown in Louisiana with $20. So Uhuru. We also have Comrade Matope in Philadelphia with $25 and says Black Power 96.3 is necessary as it is the voice, literally, of the African Revolution. It's an honor to contribute to the continuation of its programming, such as the Omali Taught Me Sunday Studies, the People's War radio show, and all the programs of the station. Uhuru Matop, we have Comrade Kabula in Chicago with $100. Uhuru Kabula and Comrade Faux Feet in St. Louis with $20 and says African liberation is heard on BP 96. Uhuru. So we have raised so far $1,660 towards Omali Taught Me's $2,000 goal. We only have $340 left to raise. So let's try to get that in. If we can get that $340 in the next 15 minutes, if you got, you saw $300 drop during this study today. So it's very possible. So go ahead and contribute, and those premium gifts can be yours when you do. We can go ahead and, I don't actually see any questions. So this does give you guys a little more room to talk about, deepen some things if you want to, but I did also want to recognize where people are viewing from in St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, West Palm Beach, Florida, Kuwait, Brooklyn, New York, Germany, Pinellas Park, Florida, Huntsville, Alabama, Occupied Azania, or what people call South Africa, San Diego, California, Detroit, Michigan, Lynn/Boston, Massachusetts, Lakeland, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, Newark, New Jersey, Sarasota, Florida, Trinidad, Ellenwood, Georgia, Uganda, Occupied Palestine, what people call Israel, Baltimore, Maryland, Fort Myers, Florida, Houston, Texas, and Virginia. So that's where people are tuning in this morning. So, Chairman, I don't know, or Benjamin, if you guys wanted to say a few more things before we get towards the announcements in about 10 minutes. So
I want to say that I think that one of the things that I hope we can contribute to, and the party has tried to do this forever, is to help people who consider themselves militants, revolutionaries, what have you, in the African community, the whole the colonized African population, is the fact that we need to, and we must necessarily learn from other revolutionaries and other revolutions that's happened in the world. And I think that's a critical thing, that we have to share our understanding of the world with each other, and it's going to affect our ability to make this struggle more effectively. I know how much I've learned from China and from Vietnam in particular. And I know that, again, that there's so much, this is really important discussion that we're having. I hope it contributes to broadening the worldview of the people who are participating. And I hope it contributes to really the development of a kind of culture of literacy. I mean, by which I mean, more than just the ability to be able to read and write in, some kind of literal sense, but to perceive and understand the world and want more and more of it, to get a greater depth of understanding, because the African Revolution is part of the world, and African people exist in the world. We don't exist in some kind of isolated bubble where we can affect what we need to happen for us and for the workers in some kind of vacuum. And I think that the success of what it is that we're attempting to do now will really contribute to the development of really international, genuine international revolutionary workers of the world, as opposed to this thing that I feel like was kind of imposed on us in the past, that the colonized people, the workers of the colonized communities, can actually consolidate our unity. In November, we, part of the coalition, the Black Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparation, we were a founding component, a leading component, causing its creation. And we are going to be participating in a traditional annual march on the White House and rally and what have you. And, we'll be talking more. We've mentioned this briefly in discussion with Union de Barrio. But we want this to be a massive come out, subsequent to the colonial virus and what we've seen in terms of the uprisings protests that's been happening, and the means by which we can go ahead and assert some kind of ideological and political leadership on the landscape of these protests and what have you, to give it some element of coherence. And from the perspective of the African People's Socialist Party, we are going to challenge this what we consider to be a kind of empty brand slogan of simply Black Lives Matter that doesn't say anything in terms of giving direction, and actually pursue the line of the fight for Black power. This is what we're going to be calling people to come and march around. And we're going to be seeing, like Mexicans and hopefully Filipinos and Palestinians and others who can unite with the African revolution for power, for Black power. And this, I think, is going to be a profoundly important thing. And we want to see hundreds and hundreds of people from throughout the United States, at least, come together to do this. And we'll be talking more about this in the upcoming days. And of course, the coalition itself will be talking about it. But our participation as the party in the Uhuru movement is for the purpose of raising up these critical questions, because our responsibility is to give leadership now while you have all these masses of people in motion. The people don't need us to teach them how to hold a demonstration or how to throw a brick, but the people need revolutionaries to be able to bring science into the mass motion that we see happening now, and that's part of what it is we'll be working at. So we'll talk some more in terms of practically, what our capacity is to make that happen with other formations and comrades. And I believe that contributes again to the consolidation of the ideas, in a material way that we've been talking about today. So that's it for me, Comrade Akile. Compañero Benjamin.
Yeah, I think we unite definitely with that call to march on that White House, right? I think it's really critical. I had the opportunity to do that last time with you, comrades, and definitely was very inspiring, taking that message of Black power to the doorstep of the white man's house, right? Built by Africans, right? And I think that's important to mention as well, as we're talking about, workers owning the means of production, while our labor is the one that built this entire empire. And we should have a determination of what we want to see happen in the future. And so part of that, creating that alternative world, is learning from those experiences of revolution that's happened throughout this hemisphere, at least. I know that sometimes language is an issue, right? When we want to learn from other comrades throughout the world, Vietnam, China, that might be I know it's important to recognize, their heroic struggles to build societies that are sustainable. And just looking at the COVID situation in Vietnam, we have a lot to learn from those comrades because they knew and were very disciplined in terms of containing that colonial virus, right? And kicking it out, not only back in 1970s, but now with the COVID-19, right? And I think now when we see, in this continent, Cuba, I think really for us is really important and significant, man, because, it was able to, for so long, continue to create and build its economic model. It has particular characteristics, right? Being an island, not having necessarily having to share borders, which made it an advantage to defend its national integrity from U.S. invasion, and it defeated U.S. imperialism in this continent, just like Vietnam was able to kick the U.S. out and the French out and defend its national integrity, and in fact unite it when colonialism wanted to divide it and keep a North and a South, they united and built one Vietnam, right? Well, Cuba, has been able to maintain its territorial integrity because of the revolution, because of the audacity, really, of the Cubans to not only gain independence but then defend its revolution. And we have a lot to learn also from the Bolivarian experience, right? The Venezuelan revolution, which is developing on a daily basis, its own capacity, despite the sanctions, the I mean, we just can't express the level of criminality that is being directed towards them by the United States, and its attempt to impose a puppet regime in the form of Juan Guaido. I mean, we know in certain terms have to denounce them and call it for what it is, right? A bunch of criminal mercenaries at the service of empire, a bunch of bootlickers that are, whose only purpose is really to subject Venezuela and the Venezuela people to colonialism, right? In his instance, a neo-colonial puppet that absolutely has no legitimacy within Venezuela. And so, we call for the end to the economic, commercial, and financial blockades of Cuba. I know that recently there's been a campaign to have even the Henry Reeve Brigade of Cuba be recognized and given the Nobel Peace Prize, which we support that because it's important to highlight really those entities that are doing good for humanity and building and sending medical brigades in a time of pandemic. That is international solidarity, right? It is an expression of international worker solidarity to challenge this pandemic. I mean, just look at the numbers today, right? Almost 3 million in the United States, right? People infected, more than 130,000 people dead as a consequence of this pandemic. And it's true. It's not that the United States it's the public policy of allowing this pandemic to infect and spread, and the great majority of people that really don't have healthcare as a real, I mean, it virtually doesn't exist, right, for the masses of our peoples. And we know that it's the people who are suffering the most from this pandemic is precisely the working class. And we have to, learn from those experiences of Cuba, Vietnam, Venezuela, to really challenge this pandemic and this pandemic known as capitalism. What I'm referring to, the pandemic of capitalism, and create a different economic social system. So with that, really appreciate the opportunity to dialogue and discuss and deepen our relationship as fraternal, sister organizations.
Next week too, Comrade Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you to Benjamin, and thank you, Chairman. And I mean, this has just been a very powerful discussion, and we're going to continue this series. And I just want to also really salute and appreciate all of our viewers and our donors for today. I want to shout out Diane Tournay in Gainesville, who donated $20, Maito, who donated $100, and Comrade Maureen in Oakland, who also donated $100. So that brought our total up to $1,880, with only $120 left to raise for the Omali Taught Me show. So at any time after this study, you can go to blackpower96.org/donate and put in the comment section Omali Taught Me if you want it to go towards this particular show goal. And I also wanted to recognize Diane, Penny, Montemelo, Renee, and Fofi, who contributed today, but also contributed to our contributed during our Black Power 96 Freedom Mic online concert, which was just 2 days ago. So thank you to our loyal base of listeners who are supporting members and contribute to multiple shows. Thank you so much for those contributions. And we only have $120 left to raise for Omali Taught Me show goal. So just putting that out there, it's a very easy, doable amount. Right now, $120. Whether you have 100, whether you have 20, go ahead and drop it in and put it towards Omali Taught Me show goal. And if you prefer to do checks and or money mailing orders, you can mail those out to Black Power 96 to 1245 18th Avenue South, St. Petersburg, Florida 33705. Again, make that up to Black Power 96, and we can accept donations that way. And yeah, so again, oh, and I also wanted to say we also had India on today. But yeah, I just want to thank you all for tuning in. And because of time, I want everyone to know that if your question was not answered, one of our moderators will correspond with you, and we'll make sure that the chairman sees your question. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. And for revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. And you can donate, volunteer, and become a supporting member or renew your support. And tune in now until July 18th for the Black Power 96 July Member Fund Drive, packed with special programming and givebacks for when you donate. If you're united with what you heard today and you want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party, you can visit apspuhuru.org for information regarding how you can apply. And to learn more about Unión do Barrio, visit uniondobarrio.org to contact, access political education, read articles from Unión do Barrio, and more. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com. And next weekend, the African National Women's Organization is hosting the Black Women's Convention themed Sisters United for the Revolution. Again, that's July 11th and 12th. And you can still register today at anwauhuru.org, so you do not want to miss that. And we'll have a special treat on July 12th on Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, because we'll have the president of the African National Women's Organization, Yeshitela on herself. So definitely don't want to miss that. We're calling people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the COVID-19 colonial virus. You've heard the statistics, you've heard how serious this pandemic is, and developmentforafrica.org has all the necessary information to help our communities navigate this pandemic. So again, developmentforafrica.org. Uhuru Furniture Stores in Oakland and Philadelphia go live on Facebook every week to highlight beautiful new pieces and build African economic self-determination. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Philly. In Oakland, California, tune in every Wednesday and Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific Time at facebook.com/Uhuru Furniture Oak. Lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. Uhuru.